there is someone within your sphere of influence, somebody that you're related to or a close friend or even an acquaintance, someone who doesn't know Jesus at all, someone who doesn't even have a cursory knowledge of Jesus. So if you had just an opportunity to have one conversation, it may even be a fairly brief dialogue. You're going to have one conversation with this person. You have the opportunity to share with them who is Jesus. And again, we're talking about somebody who knows nothing. You are starting completely from scratch. So what would you do, and where would that conversation take you? So if you had asked me that question this past Monday morning, what I might say, I might go and look at John chapter 8. The idea of Jesus is the light of the world. He said, I'm the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but have the light of life. That's a pretty vivid image, isn't it? To talk about Jesus being light. He is the light. He doesn't just illumine light. He is the light. What does that mean? And as I posed to us last week on what does it mean to walk in darkness, that might be a pretty good starting place. But if you asked me the same question Tuesday of last week, I would say, no, I don't. In that one conversation, I don't believe that's the passage I would use, nor would that be the image I would employ. Because by Tuesday, I'd already spent a lot of time in John 10 in anticipation of our time together this morning. And specifically in verse 11, Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Now, it was a little bit intimidating to him. I have to admit, how many of y'all are well acquainted with sheep? I know nothing about sheep, and it's a little embarrassing. My dad was in the agricultural business the whole time of my growing up, so I have a pretty good knowledge of agricultural equipment. I know a little bit about cotton farming, but I know nothing about sheep. And so my understanding of this very idea that Jesus is the good shepherd was fairly limited. So I had to do a little homework this week, and I want to share that homework with you. Jesus is the good shepherd. Lynn Anderson, as he references sheep, says this: ancient Middle Eastern shepherds lived in the pasture with the flock and were as much a part of the land as the sheep were. Through a lifetime of shared experience, shepherds nurtured endearing trust with their sheep. Our elders, those who shepherd after us, are reading a book that Lynn wrote entitled, They Smell Like Sheep. And I started to say as I began this morning, I hate to break the news to you, but you smell like sheep. And you might actually take offense to that, the idea that you smell like sheep, but this idea that we are the sheep, and we're spending, as we meet as a group of elders and ministers, we're looking at this whole idea of what does it mean for them to be shepherd and shepherd after the people. But as Lynn points out, it's a very, very personal thing. R. Kent Hughes, who's done some research also on shepherding, says, while sheep were indeed raised by some for food and sacrifices, more often sheep were raised for wool. So therefore, a shepherd would typically tend his sheep for years, calling each of his flock by name. It was a highly personal occupation. The very existence of sheep depended on the shepherd and his 24-hour care. I had no inkling that was the case. William Barclay says the shepherd's task was constant and dangerous. He had to guard the flock against wild animals, especially against wolves, and there were thieves ready to steal the sheep. And Jesus refers to himself as the Good Shepherd. There's a book that was published several years ago entitled A Shepherd Looks at Psalm 23. Philip Keller composed this book. It's a great read. If you ever an opportunity, you'll never read the 23rd Psalm the same if you read this book, A Shepherd Looks at Psalm 23. Keller has some very specific things to say about shepherding that I think will be very helpful for us this morning as we think in terms of Jesus being the Good Shepherd. Here's what Keller says. Among the animal kingdom, Sheep seem to have come out on the short end. From all accounts, they are of limited intelligence. When it comes to finding food, they are definitely uncreative. As creatures of habit, they follow paths through desolate places, even though not far away is excellent forage. Sheep are also given to listless wandering. There are even accounts of their walking into open fire. Shepherds confirm they are timid and stubborn. They can be frightened by the most ridiculous things, though at other times, nothing can move them. They are absolutely defenseless. There is no way a sheep can defend itself. And furthermore, of all the animals subject to husbandry, they take the most work. Unfortunately, that sounds a little bit like us, does it not? So in John chapter 10, verse 11, Jesus says, the Good Shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And as if he really wants to impress this idea on the hearts of those to whom he was addressing, he says it again in verse 14. I lay down my life for the sheep. Now, in terms of his original hearers, those who are hearing this for the first time, do you think they had any concept of the sacrificial death of Jesus, that what he was really going to do on their behalf? Probably not. They had an excellent understanding of what went on in terms of the sheep in the pasture. There's no doubt about that. But they probably couldn't grasp the idea of his sacrificial death, and it would have been fascinating to be a part of that generation after the resurrection, after they experienced the reality of the resurrection, to look back and realize Jesus is the Good Shepherd, and he laid down his life for us. So 2 questions, and we've been posing the same 2 questions really every week for the most part. What do you believe about Jesus? I've been asking that fundamental question, and so as we think about this image in John chapter 10, do you really believe that Jesus is the Good Shepherd? And if you do, how does that impact your faith? Jesus remains the Good Shepherd. As we think about that, I lay down my life for the sheep, but even for us, even as our experience as followers of Jesus, at this very moment, he is our Good Shepherd. So in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 25, Peter says, for you were like sheep going astray, but now you have returned to the shepherd and overseer of your souls. I think in the context of 1 Peter chapter 2, likely he's talking about conversion experience. He is talking about people who have come to Christ. So at one time you were like sheep going astray, but now you have returned to the shepherd and overseer of your souls. But isn't it true that such a return is a needed process in an ongoing way? Don't you find that all of us have this inclination to wander? All of us have the propensity to go astray at times. And thus, he gives us the ongoing privilege of returning to the shepherd and overseer of our souls. Jesus is the Good Shepherd for us. So I've got a question. This will be one that will necessitate some degree of thought. When you pray, when you find yourself in a moment of solitude, when you go off by yourself, no one else is around, and you finally have a moment of peace, and you can actually pray, What image do you have of Jesus in your mind? Is there any image at all? I don't know about you. I'm a real visual person. I'm a visual learner. If I can see a video on YouTube, I can do anything, but I got to see a picture. I need good picture, and video's even better. And so as you pray, is there an image you have of Jesus and who he is? How do you visualize him? I've often thought of Jesus as he is portrayed in Hebrews chapter 4, that he is the great high priest who is not unable to sympathize with our weaknesses. He is there for us and has been tempted in every way that we are tempted, yet was without sin. So I've often thought we are coming to Jesus, the high priest. That's often the image I've had. So what is your image as you pray? What is that image lingering in your mind as you pray? And what if you envision Jesus as the shepherd and overseer of your soul? In what manner could that transform prayer? That you come to him knowing he is the shepherd who wants to bring you back in as you have gone astray. Jesus who has this nurturing, caring manner. Jesus the good shepherd who knows your voice all too well. And when you go astray, if you recall, Philip Keller says, sheep are given to listless wandering. And I wonder about us, so we given to listless wandering. You know, I had to look up the word listless. I thought, I think I know what that means, but I probably better look it up. And it's this idea of just being sort of indifferent, almost this lackadaisical, uncaring way. I just listless wandering. I really don't give a whole lot of thought to where I'm going or what I'm doing. I'm just kind of out there wandering. And wonder if, as us, as sheep with 2 legs and not 4 legs, if we too are given to listless wandering. Keller also made the reference that sheep are timid and stubborn. What about us? On the timid part, I don't know how timid I am. Stubborn, only about every 30 seconds do I experience stubbornness. How about you? Where are you on the stubbornness scale? Hard to move, difficult to get from point A to point B. And Keller also says, sheep are frightened by the most ridiculous things. And as we are frightened and even lack courage in the expression of our faith, are we frightened by the most ridiculous things? And we come to Jesus with this image in our minds of Jesus the Good Shepherd, knowing that when we're given to listless wandering, he desires to bring us back. And in our moments of timidity or downright stubbornness, we come to him knowing he desires to bring us where we need to be. And in those moments of being frightened, even by the most ridiculous things, Jesus is there. Finally, Keller makes the point that sheep are absolutely defenseless. And I couldn't help but think of the image of spiritual warfare. If we're going to face spiritual warfare all alone, all by our lonesome selves, we are in deep trouble. But as we face the realities of spiritual warfare and acknowledge our own defenseless position, the Good Shepherd is there to guide us every step of the way. Jim Martin wrote an article entitled, Listening to One Voice. It's a great article. I just wanted to share some of Jim's insights with you this morning. He says, we are a distracted people. The phone rings, you have a text. Have you checked your email? Someone has contacted you on Messenger. Someone sent you a tweet. And by the way, someone's at your door. He says there is no shortage of voices wanting our attention. Have you found this to be true? more than any other voice, we desperately need to hear the voice of Jesus. Jesus referred to people as sheep and himself as the shepherd. Jesus said that the sheep hear the voice of the shepherd and they follow him because they know his voice. Setting time aside to listen to the voice of Jesus in Scripture is an important daily discipline. His voice will bring clarity and wisdom to your life. So Jim's thought is, how do we make it in this world? We intentionally listen to one voice. We intentionally listen to one voice. The voice of Jesus will bring focus and clarity in a world of distraction. So one last thought, an early morning shepherd. There's an article from Penny Nichols, and saw firsthand. I've never had this experience. I've never had the experience of watching a shepherd in action firsthand. And this is really just a vivid image that I think you'll appreciate. Here's what Penny says. It was 4:30 a.m. in Jerusalem. So let's try to imagine. Try to imagine yourself in the early morning hours in Jerusalem, of all places. So he says, from an open window, I heard a noise demanding attention. It was the sound of a shepherd with his flock. Surrounded by his sheep, the shepherd stood as the sheep fed around him. His call was a continual reminder of his presence. Occasionally, one began to stray, and the shepherd would throw a stone under the sheep's nose to get its attention. Ready to move, the shepherd moved to the next grass. Like iron filings drawn to a magnet, the sheep coalesced around him as he led them, surrounded by his flock. The instant the shepherd stopped, the sheep repeated the routine, spread out and eat. They came to a rock wall with an open gate, and the shepherd took them through the gate, and the feeding began. And as the flock moved, it was like watching a living organism with the shepherd at the heart, expanding and contracting with the presence of the shepherd. And here's the final thought. Nichols says, I witness the living imagery of the intimacy of Jesus with his followers. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. I'm going to ask for our shepherds, those who shepherd and oversee us. Will y'all stand where you are? Would y'all do that? These are our shepherds, the overseers of our soul. And we readily admit that all of us smell like sheep. So as Kirk leads us in an invitation song this morning, our shepherds welcome you. And they exhibit the very heart of the Good Shepherd as we stand and sing this morning.